What do I need to be good at to be great at something?
Hello, everyone. You are listening to She Leads with Carly, and in this show, we talk to the absolute best, brightest, and yes, badass leaders.
Tap into where your natural curiosity takes you. Just making sure you're not your own roadblock. Even if you do fall, you're going to fall and you're going to learn.
Together, let's build a DNA of what it takes to rise to the top and truly make an impact. I'm your host, Carly Malatsky. I am incredibly excited to welcome Maria Barrera to the show today. Maria is the founder and CEO of Clayful, a mental health platform for young kids, ensuring that each kid has someone to talk to as they encounter challenges that come their way. Prior to Clayful, Maria took on leadership roles in growth and marketing at ChartHop and an education technology company, Nearpod. While receiving her bachelor's and master's in mechanical engineering from Stanford University, she also worked for Boeing and GE Aviation in manufacturing engineering. Maria, welcome to the show. I am so excited to talk to you.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Of course. So first, set the scene for me. Where are you in the world? What's going on?
Yeah, I am in San Francisco, and I moved out here after finishing up at Stanford and have kind of bounced back between here and Florida. I went to New York for a bit, but now I'm back and hoping to see, that tech scene come back here too.
I think slowly but surely, I think it's coming back. So that's good. So Maria, I want to start all the way from the beginning. I want to know, Maria, as a little girl, how was your childhood? What were you almost dreaming of? What did you see for yourself when you were growing up in that sense?
I think about this a lot because I work with kids literally every day, and I'm like, oh, that happened to me. That happened to me.
Yeah.
So it's, very present. I grew up in Colombia. So I was born and raised in Colombia. We moved out to the US when I was 10 with my mom, moved to South Florida. And I came without, really knowing the language, and with definitely my mom not knowing the language at all or having, any sort of degree that would be transferable here. Because she was an economist, and apparently if you don't speak English, that doesn't matter.
Yeah.
So it was a huge transition growing up, and honestly, it was a lot of pressure. My mom, leaving my whole family there. My sister and my dad stayed in Colombia, and we came, to sort of give me a better life. You're like a typical immigrant story, and I would say we succeeded at that for sure, but it didn't come without, again, a ton of pressure on my shoulders.
Yeah.
And to make that happen. So when I think about like the work that I'm doing now, it's very much tied to that.
That's incredible. So remind me, you said you were 10 years old, or how old were you when you went to South Florida?
10.
And so at this point in your life, like you said, there's so much pressure, but again, you're 10 years old. How did you know what steps you need to take and what path you need to go on in order to actually set you up for success and give back to your family? How did you know that?
I didn't, right? That's I was sort of guessing my way through it. I wanted to be an astronaut. That was sort of my goal. I was obsessed with the planets and obsessed with the moon. So it's like, I'm going to be an astronaut. And the best way to get there was to be an engineer. So my dad was a civil engineer. So I kind of knew a little bit about what that world could look like. And I, was good at math, or worked hard at math and science. So that's where sort of that path, I guess, started. But when I realized I was good at it, I started working with others to help them in math and science too. So I was tutoring a ton, and starting in like high school was working with kids, helping them with like everything from pre-calc to physics to I started an Italian club in the middle school nearby, teaching the kids the middle school kids Italian, even though I had just learned it. So it's funny because now I think I'm like, oh, that was the like seed of education being at the core of what I do now.
Yeah.
But at that point, it was just like, hey, I want to be an astronaut, and I'm going to be good at math and science, and that's going to hopefully get me there.
That's amazing. So when you mention this, I think of my conversation with Sylvia Acevedo, and she has an incredible story, became the CEO of Girl Scouts. And I talked to her a lot about the difference of boys versus girls at a young age, right? And so if you, 10 years old, you knew you were good at math, yes, your dad, civil engineer, but it's still incredible that you had almost this confidence, or at least you saw engineering as a feasible option. And maybe, maybe not 10 years old, but still almost being exposed to that and saying, you know what, doesn't matter about external, societal norms and things like that, but I have this passion and I can go down the engineering route. Does that apply? Like, do you think that's accurate?
I think so. In Colombia, I went to an all-girls school, and I was there until third, fourth grade. And I think that played a role in me not knowing that this was a thing. I was with all girls. Yeah. So no one was saying that, oh, this boy's better at math, or having any sort of like gendered interaction, because we were all girls. And I think that now that you mentioned it, I'm like, oh, that's probably why I never thought about it until really getting to the US. And at that point, I'm in a public school, everything's sort of, what you would expect it to be. And I remember in fifth grade, we had that was the point where they started to differentiate classes. So like,
yep.
Most subjects were taught in one class except for math.
Okay.
And I ended up being in the advanced math course, and that, again, I didn't notice it. And for I think a long time I was pretty blind to it until maybe even like in college was really when I realized, like, oh wait, there's no one else who looks like me in this class. I felt really lucky that actually at the Stanford send-off party, and we'll get to like, how I got there, but
yeah,
one of my best friends, who we're still friends today, like I was a bridesmaid at her wedding a month ago, she was also a Latin woman from Miami wanting to study aerospace engineering. So it was like I was surrounded by these people who like were like me and still did it. So it wasn't, I never thought about it as a barrier until maybe like later on. Yeah,
it just shows the importance almost of your circle and who's around you and who's championing around you, which is so fascinating. And it's sad in a way, because if you don't have that, then you may never go down that path. But then anyway, so it's really cool. So tell me now, in high school, you continued down this math, science, and teaching others and whatnot. When did Stanford become a reality, and how did that kind of process happen?
Yeah, so I didn't know what Stanford was. I knew I wanted to be an engineer. So I applied to the top 10 engineering schools and to UF, which is the best school in Florida. And it's like, well, I'm going to apply to these and see what happens from there. And I definitely think it's one, my mom, growing up a single mom, my dad was very involved, but he was in another country. And he was always like reading for me from behind, but like not present. And so I saw my mom sort of manage and, go through life on her own. So it's like, great, I'm going to be a strong, independent woman too. And that meant that, yes, I'm going to be an engineer, and I'm going to apply to these schools, and that's what I'm going to do. It was never like, what if I don't get in, or what? It's like, no, I'm just going to do this. Right. And, again, blinded to a lot of the barriers. And now I see it, and I'm like, oh, good for you.
Yeah.
And what's interesting is, so I had good grades, right? Like I worked really hard, and that's always like at the core of it, because I wanted to be this strong, independent person. And when I went to go see my counselor, call it junior year, I was like, great, here's my transcript, here's my SAT scores. And I remember she looked at me and was like, you should really think about applying to another safety school. And I was like, what? She's like telling me that I wasn't going to get into UF, and that I should really basically set my sights lower. And it was really the first time that someone was like, oh no, you're not good enough. You're not going to be able to do this, to my face.
Yeah.
Thankfully I had already submitted my applications. So it wasn't, it didn't stop me, but it was still this weird moment of like, wait, what do you mean? Like like the numbers are there. I've worked hard for this. What do you mean it's not going to happen? And so you get the acceptance in like, I think it's February 13th. So it's before everyone else, which is in like April.
Yeah.
And MIT, it's on Pi Day.
Okay.
So it's like, I got into UF. I'm like, great, I'm going there. Like, this is going to be like, the safety part is done. Like, I got that. And then MIT didn't let me in. And I was like, well, that's mean. What do you mean? So it started to like face these things. It's like, wait, I can't do this. What? Like, and I think like that one hit me really hard because of what had already been, the seeds that had already been planted in my brain that like, oh, you're not going to be able to do this. And you're not going to be good enough. So then when Stanford let me in, I was like, oh, wait, I can do this. And it was a really exciting moment, even though I had no idea what Stanford truly was, right? Like this was before sort of a lot of the Stanford had really entered a lot of the mainstream media, right? Like it was before Avatar and it was all over and before, like High School Musical and Vanessa had gone to, to Stanford. So it was still very, like, I had no idea what privilege I had just received.
Yeah.
And I, embarrassingly spelled Stanford wrong in my Facebook status when I announced it.
It's okay.
Thank you, Facebook, for continuing to remind me of that every year.
Love that.
But the first time I stepped on campus was really for new student orientation. And it was, I had no idea how much it would change my life.
Yeah. Oh, that's incredible. And I think it seems like almost that first taste of, look, I've worked so hard. I'm delivering, the factual numbers that you need. And then here it doesn't add up, right? Like I've experienced that with, soccer and whatnot, but I think everyone almost has that one taste of it at some point, at least, so I think it's definitely a defining part in a sense. So you mentioned, hard work, 4.0 GPA. I have heard that didn't change when you went to Stanford and you exceeded, potentially higher than 4.0. You decided to do mechanical engineering. At this point, you're still astronaut, going to space. How are you thinking of your career? It's still almost like the same as a Maria as a little girl?
Almost. It turns out I needed contacts. So, and maybe at that point you needed 20/20 vision to be an astronaut. Maybe that has changed. So it's like, well, that's not going to work. What are my options now? I'm like, well, I'll build the planes. I'll build the spaceships. Like that's a good,
casual.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So I, during college, I got internships at GE, at Boeing, and it was this like stark realization that those industries move really slowly.
Yeah.
And I partly blame Stanford for this, but there's something in the water there where they're just entrepreneurial. The entrepreneurial bug just bites you, where you're just like, well, I can do things and like change the world and like move fast and there's this thing called technology that can make people's lives better and different. And I was kind of experiencing the shock of, it takes me 3 weeks to get a computer for a 10-week internship, while at the same time seeing the power of these startups that are blowing up, coming out of Stanford or being in Silicon Valley. And that's when I was like, well, maybe there's other avenues.
Yeah.
And maybe the startup route is an interesting one.
So would you say that was almost your first seed of saying, okay, maybe I could start something? Or at least like, were you surrounded by entrepreneurs? Did you have that growing up at all? Or was it more so like coming to Stanford, there was an energy? I agree. There's something in the air at Stanford for sure. But is that almost your first taste of it?
I think it's the first time I can like truly, like I knew what it was called, but like when I was tutoring, it's like I had my own tutoring company, right? I would work with kids from 3 p.m. to 10 p.m. and get paid a lot of money to do that. So I had my own little business. Yeah. And I think at the core, it was really a desire to be independent and to not have to rely on anyone. And that's probably informed by my mom's experience and getting divorced like a year after I was born, right? And like having to sort of run through life on her own. So that I think is a big core sort of pillar to it. And then the second one is my dad did build his own business as well. So I had seen it in my own family, and I'm like, oh, then it's possible. So it's a combination of all those pieces. And I think like Stanford just made it a reality that like, oh, I could do that too.
Yeah.
And I do that at a scale beyond, tutoring every single afternoon.
So if you think about, the past years, almost if you can pinpoint a shift, and particularly I want to ask about a particular movie that may have come up it's called Waiting for Superman. I want to know your experience of almost like, how you view that shift to saying education is something I need to go down. And that's maybe, the genesis of Clayful, which we'll get into even more greater detail. But walk me through that and where almost the shift saying, okay, maybe astronaut and space and Boeing and GE Aviation, maybe I'm going to kind of go away towards something else.
Yeah. It was one, the lack of speed in aero industry. As I started looking for other things that mechanical engineers could do. And at that point in Silicon Valley, you have a lot of smart locks and a lot of drones. Self-driving cars were still a little early. We actually tried to start a self-driving flying car company at that point, which, different. Our TAs literally, I think, laughed us out of the room. That's okay. We pivoted. So through that pivoting experience, we ended up, this was at a D school class where it's all about how to use technology to increase financial inclusion. And
D school is design school, by the way, but yes.
Yeah. Yes. Design school that's known for taking design thinking and applying it to very challenging and complex problems that face our society today. So for us, it was, how do you decrease the financial divide between classes? It's like, okay, no big deal. So did a ton of research through that project. The whole design thinking process is about talking to your user, figuring out who the user is, figuring out what their needs are. And through that process, we talked to, homeless people. We talked to kids. We talked to different service workers and essentially everyone we can get our hands on. And when we talked to kids, there was this powerful moment when I realized that the middle school age child is such a core inflection point in their community, because often, especially in immigrant families, oftentimes they again came to the US to give them a better life, and everything the family does is like to support that work. And so the things that the kid's still really malleable, so you can have a big impact by focusing on the student or the kid, but they also have a big effect in their community and in their families and across, because again, the families came here for them. So we started really digging into kids, and then from there looking into education and what are the different systems that kids are part of. And through that process ended up landing on this documentary called Waiting for Superman that like literally changed my life, because that was the moment that I realized I'm like, oh, I remember I was bawling. I cry a lot at powerful media. So it wasn't surprising. However, it was like, this was next level. And it was just this aha moment. I'm like, oh wait, I don't want to build smart locks. I don't want to build a drone. Like I want to do that. Like I want to support the education world. And like, there's so much that's unfortunately broken in our education system, not because educators don't care, but because the system itself hasn't caught up with how kids learn, or, it was invented 100 years ago. So there's so much that we can do. And that was really the aha moment. I'm like, oh, I need to like all these things that I thought were my hobbies, right? Like starting the tutoring company, like starting the Italian club, working with kids all the time. It's like, it wasn't a hobby. It was really like what I wanted to do. So it changed my life.
Even in the education space. And you mentioned with Boeing and GE Aviation, all this, like it's a slow moving industry. And I could argue like education as well. Like you said, it hasn't been changed in so long. And if I were to think of like the future of education, I could give you a very different, an ideal very different way of education, but that's going to take time. Did that come into your mind saying like, yes, I want to make an impact in this space, but again, the innovation, the cycle, public versus private, all the different things that come into it. Did that play a part as well?
Not in that way. And I think that like, there's something really beautiful about beginner's mind where you just like, you don't know what you don't know, right? So you just like haven't been jaded yet. And at that point I was like, oh, okay, I want to be in education. Like, what could that look like? And I started talking to people. And one of the people I talked to was the founder of a tiny, tiny little company called Nearpod, who was doing a fellowship at the Stanford D School. And they were building essentially like at that point, it was a PowerPoint on steroids. And, iPads were just making their way into the classroom. And they had this moment where they realized, well, iPads, teachers were complaining because they're like, I can't run PowerPoint on my iPad. I can't run Java. Like, what am I supposed to do with this? My kids know how to use this better than I do. How am I supposed to use this in the classroom? And they created, I think like what was the most beautiful part of it is they created a very simple solution to that problem in that it really was like a PowerPoint. Like you could drag and drop your PowerPoint. It would stream to the student's device. And then when the teacher went to the next slide, the kids went to the next slide. And coming from Silicon Valley, you're like, well, that's like super simple and like not that cool. But then you go on their Twitter feed and you start to see the impact that that's having in classrooms and how that's supporting classroom management, how it's increasing student engagement, how kids are actually paying attention in class. And I saw it and I'm like, oh, like I think what's compelling about the education space is that you're right, the system itself, and I said that like hasn't evolved in a while. And because of that, there's actually like simple solutions that could have a huge impact. And that's what Nearpod was doing. And right away, I'm like, oh, like you don't need to have flying cars to make an impact. Like there's simpler ways to do that can reach just as many people and like change people's lives in a pretty meaningful way.
Yeah. So from a career perspective, right? Someone coming out of college, in a sense, were you scared that you were going down this route versus sticking with engineering, kind of continuing to practice that engineering mindset and the skill set that, like your father did and things like that, and saying, no, you know what, I'm going to go to this tiny startup. I don't know what the hell will happen with it, but I'm just going to, do this because this is something I'm passionate about. Did that come into your mind? Would you have done anything differently starting off?
I think that like Tina C like always says, like, it's not about making the right decision. It's about making the decision right. And I think that
I love that. Yeah.
that quote has really impacted me throughout a lot of big decisions in my life.
Yeah.
At that moment, I felt, well, like, hey, this startup is tiny, but it'll give me the ability to really get to know the education technology space and open a lot of other doors. I was joining as an intern. I didn't even have a full-time job, and I also, when I met the founder, I saw one of his first questions to me was, what do you want to do in 5 years? And I was like, I want to start my own company. And he's like, great, we'll help you get there. Like, I will be basically like, I will be your personal mentor to help you get the skill sets you need to get there. And like that, and he's followed through on his promise. He was the first check into Clayful. And
wow.
It's like, it's that, to your point earlier about the circle and the people you surround yourself with, like having those people that will cheer you on and that will like, we changed my role every 6 months to a year. And he was very intentional about literally giving me a startup boot camp because I got to see everything. And I, a year ago, as I was starting Clayful, like there has not been yet one moment that I felt fully unprepared for. And that I feel very lucky for that. And I 1,000% thank you for that.
Wow. That's incredible. And I love that because even like anyone can almost take that piece, that golden nugget to any job. And I could argue that every boss that you have ideally is going to be asking you, where do you see yourself in 5 years? Right. And it's not just the company, it's more like you personally, professionally, how are you going to grow? So I think that's amazing. I love that. So then tell me a little bit, obviously before Clayful, you ended up actually going to ChartHop and you didn't go start Clayful right after Nearpod. So what was that almost gap between? What made you think, okay, no, I still need to go work at this company before I get started?
Yeah, I've really wanted, I believe starting a company is really hard. Like it's the hardest thing probably you'll ever do. And I really wanted to have a problem that I cared about deeply to make that jump. And I didn't know what that problem was. After Nearpod, I moved to New York to lead the acquisition of a company called Vocabulary. They do hip hop based curriculum. It is amazing. And I was, living my New York life, living in Brooklyn, working in Dumba. It was so fun. And then one of our former investors reached out and she's like, hey, I know you're probably not ready to leave, but I just invested in this company and I think they could really use your skill set. And I, one, was of course really honored. And two, when I looked at it and I met with the founder, he asked me the same question. He asked me, what do you want to be in 5 years? And I felt that like same layer of caring, not just for the role that I was going to do, but the person that I wanted to become.
Yeah.
And that was one, a really powerful thing. And two, the product itself was, even though it wasn't an education, it felt very mission driven, right? It was all about data transparency and helping companies make decisions based on data when it comes to pay transparency, when it comes to representation, right? Like my favorite visual, we have the company's doing great. They just raised their Series C. I have this visual of the org chart by gender. And when you see the colors, you're just like, oh, I can't lie to myself anymore that we have a diverse management team. Like I can literally see it, that every box is blue. So to me, it was just such a powerful way of driving change. And I felt like I should jump on that bus. And it had really great investors behind it, Andreessen let their seed, and it was tiny again, right? Nearpod at that point had grown to, I don't even know how many people, but to be big enough that one person wouldn't be able to make the biggest difference, anymore. And I just craved that like early stage chaos again. So I joined as our head of marketing in January 2020.
Perfect timing.
Perfect timing, especially when you want to sell into HR.
Oh my goodness. So, okay, walk me through that experience, because I'm sure that brings its own level of chaos that you didn't expect, but in a way probably prepared you again for the chaos that would soon ensue. So yeah, how was that?
Yeah, I mean, that's where I saw the rise of mental health and the need, so two things. One, we sold into HR, so you could tell very quickly, like, what are the things that HR cares about? And mental health very quickly rose to the top of their priorities. Two, part of my job was our product is designed for growing companies and for scaling companies. And we had a visualization of the companies by industry. And I kept on seeing the mental health bucket just continuously grow and grow and grow. I'm like, oh, wait, there's something going on here. But I didn't see anything for kids. And this was now, fast forward a year and a half, and I started thinking about and doing some research. And one fateful Tuesday night, I'm scrolling on Twitter because that's when one does when one can't fall asleep. And I see this article from the New York Times about the rising suicide rates in 8-year-olds.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it was that same reaction that I had when I watched Waiting for Superman, where I cried a lot. And then I was like, this is what I need to go do. Like, this is it. And I literally, it was 2 a.m. But I literally emailed Ian, our CEO, and was like, I have to talk to you. And I just, at that point, I was like, this is it. Like, I need to go work on this. I had no idea what it would look like. I will say I was very lucky. Nearpod had an exit a couple months before that. So I felt I had a good cushion to sort of make that leap. And that was important because, immigrant mindset, you can't ever not have income. And yeah, I just quit and then spent the next couple months trying to figure out what that could look like.
Wow. So Okay. So if I understand this correctly, you came across an article on Twitter, and literally that 2 a.m., that morning, that night, whatever you like to say, you emailed your boss or the CEO and you were like, look, I have to go do this. I need to leave. I need to go solve this problem. And what I love about that, and now kind of almost with my, investor hat that I've transitioned, but in a sense though, you come across almost two buckets of entrepreneurs. One is the type saying like, I have, I want to start a company, so I'm going to go to the drawing board and I'm going to see, I'm going to start brainstorming and what that company is. And then on the other side, it's I need to do this. Like, I can't do anything else. Like, this is such a problem that is affecting me. I can't sleep at night because I need to do this. And I think that passion is so important. And so before we even get into that though, tell me about, that next journey that you started on. Did you have a co-founder? I'm guessing not, but how did that whole process happen in the start of Clayful?
I would say that was probably the hardest 3 months of my life, because as a type A driven person who's always had a next step, you'd have no idea what the next step looks like. And, you see these sort of windows behind me, like those were filled with Post-its. And I was just talking to everyone and anyone I could get my hands on. I joined the On Deck Health Fellowship. I was consulting with a couple companies that were working with schools in different ways. And I am, because again, can't not have an income. It was really hard because I had no idea what it was going to look like. And I talked to a couple companies in the space, but I started to develop this very clear point of view of who I wanted to build for and what I wanted to, like the constraints I wanted to set for myself. And I didn't find anyone who fit those. So I want to build and building something for kids without disposable income, families without disposable income. And find that, for a lot of communities, like therapy has become a status symbol. And the way that we've now taken like mental health and thought about it is it's very much it makes it so it's accessible to some, but definitely not everyone. So that was a big priority for me. The second one was to be able to reach students where their family isn't driving mental health for themselves. So maybe it's because they're busy or because there's stigmas against it, right? But like I think about my own family, and when I was in high school, my mom, I was struggling. There was a lot of pressure. Young Maria was a little firecracker. And my mom got me a therapist, and he was this very kind 65-year-old German man. And I was like, what do you think
I'm sure you can relate.
65-year-old German man has in common with 15-year-old Maria? So it's even little things like that like, even though and like for her, it felt like it was really hard for her to admit that like I needed support and to because it felt like I was broken and that like she had done something wrong, and she carried a lot of guilt for that. So I wanted to support kids without giving families that weight, because I don't think that's I don't think it's accurate, and two, I don't think it's fair. And then the third, which I'll tell you, is really working on prevention and not just reactive solutions. Everything I saw out there was post-clinical, post-diagnosis. And when I talk to therapists, they're like, by the time a kid gets to me, like there's so much guilt and there's so many things that have to happen that anything on the prevention side could have 10x the impact.
Did you have any major pivots at that early stage, like in that discovery phase, or did you've almost kept this straight mission the whole way through?
Dude, that's a very good question. I don't think so. Like, I mean, I think because I had those guiding principles, it's been right away. I was like, well, it can't be direct to consumer because families without disposable income can't pay for that.
Right.
And you're relying on the family. So that's where I started to look at, okay, are there any other models? Can insurance pay for this? But then it kind of hit, it was incongruent with the third bucket, which is prevention, not reactive, and like not post-diagnosis, which is all that insurance will pay for.
Right.
So like like that's how my brain works, right? It works by constraints. So once I have those constraints, it's like, well, like who else cares about this problem? Educators care, schools can care. And it just turns out that they have a ton of money because of the COVID relief funds that they have to spend. And this was just when like a lot of schools were just getting back from COVID and starting to see the challenges in the classroom that students were dealing with after not being in school for so long, or after not having that structure.
Yeah.
So I think because of those early constraints, it's been really like not a direct line. And we've definitely like changed little things. Initially I was like, we'll do video, we'll do voice, and we'll do this. And it's like, no, actually we need to focus. And, there's been sort of iterations on that end. But at the core, those constraints remain very clear and very aligned. And the initial idea, the output from my Beautiful Mind Post-it party was, and I wrote a manifesto.
As one does.
As one does. And I shared it with a couple of friends and people I trusted. And it's like, what do you think? Like, is there anything here? Does this resonate? And one person in particular was like, this resonates a lot.
Yeah.
What do you need? Like, what do you need to get started? And it's like, wait, what? What do you mean? What do I need? She's like, what do you need money? Like, what do you need? I'm like, oh, okay. Well, can I get back to you on that? and like, I went through build a financial model. I was like, okay, I think I need this much. And she's like, great, I'll give you $250,000 or $500,000. And I was like, what?
Wow.
And it was this like incredible moment of like, oh wait, there's something here, and like this is real, and we're gonna do this, and we're doing it.
Oh, that's incredible. So, okay, even before you mentioned how at 15 years old, your mom set up a therapist for you, and I want to just touch on the stigma of therapy, and even back then, I'm sure it was even bigger, and it's still prevalent today, but. First of all, when you had therapy at 15, did you think yourself that you're broken? Like, how did you experience that yourself? And how are you almost trying to break down that barrier and continue to break it down, saying, no, this is a good thing and this can help you?
So the reason I was privileged to go to therapy with our friendly 65-year-old German man is because I ended up at rehab for a weekend because I drank too much and the police thought I was on drugs and they sent me to rehab. And it was just like to your question about like, did I feel like I was broken? It's like that experience broke me in a way, right? And I think as a kid, I like held so much of that pressure and so much of that like desire to break free. And I've always, my mom would joke around how like we went to Disney World and I would like go walk around by myself. And she's like, they had to like leash me. I was a leash baby, Maria? Just so you know, because I was just like
puts a lot of context.
Yeah, exactly. It was a lot, and I didn't know what to call it. I didn't know how to deal with it, and I was also like a cool, popular kid that needed to have. I had a reputation to uphold, so I was never gonna talk about the things that I was struggling with my friends because like I have a reputation to uphold, right? So it's and that's what I see in middle school and high school kids today, where it's the same thing, where we all and adults like we all tend like want to put up a facade that like we have it all together and we don't, right? And it's okay not to, right? And there's been a lot more conversation on like it's okay not to be okay, and I think the work that artists are doing and athletes are doing to really normalize that is so powerful. And the having a third party that like doesn't judge you and like that you don't need to see at school every day, and that it is also a really powerful way to at least like start that conversation, right? And like start to understand like why you may not be feeling your best. So yeah, I did think there was something wrong. And during the pandemic, I moved back home for a bit, and I went through all my like, you do exchange notes and like my journals or whatever. And I could see points at which like I was struggling, and then like, but didn't have anyone to talk to about it. And I couldn't tell my mom because I didn't want her to feel like she made a mistake. And I didn't want her to feel that like that something was wrong because she had sacrificed so much to get me to where I was. So it's like putting a lot of weight on myself as a 14, 15-year-old kid to figure it out when I needed more support.
Wow. And I think, first of all, I'm so happy you mentioned this purely because it's so common, right? And even more so, like you said, you were popular at school, from the outside, things were probably great. And people were like, she's smart, she's going to Stanford. Like there's, so many different things that come up, but internally, like there's, beyond, so many other things that's going on. And even more so, I think with social media now and, comparing to others and, totally a facade of just, they're having so much fun and I'm just sitting in my room. And, there's so many different rabbit holes that people go down. And I think having that outlet, and again, like almost relieving yourself of that pressure of saying, I can't tell my mom because she's given so much for me and she'll associate with her as a mother rather than like me. So very much, I think a lot of people can relate to that. And I think it's so important to even just talk about it. And I think that helps a lot. So now at Clayful, obviously being a founder is far from easy. So tell me a little bit of your experience, early days now. What's the biggest challenge? What's something that people don't even talk about enough about being a founder?
Yeah, I mean, I hear the whole like it's lonely at the top and like it's lonely to be a founder. And I started this journey on my own, right? And those like 3 months that I told you about, like those were deep and they were on my own and they were hard. And I found as I was going through that process, I reached out to a former coworker and I was asking her about her experience because she has young kids. I wanted to hear, from a parent perspective. And she's like, wait, this is actually really interesting. Like, tell me more. and like she ended up joining a year ago. And so I do have a co-founder. And like that to me has been the biggest gift because we can talk about anything and everything. And it's, I don't feel that loneliness in any way. I felt it at some point, like initially when there was like no clear direction of like, is this going to work? Or,
right.
What are we doing? But now it like feels like such a true partnership that it makes everything so much easier. So definitely recommend having a partner to do this with. The hardest part, I think, is as a perfectionist and someone who has a strong point of view, and this is my baby, right? Like, and everything that goes out, everything that we do is, I think, a reflection of me and a reflection of our work, and that again puts a lot of pressure on me and puts a lot of pressure on my team. So managing that, I think, is the hardest part.
So, okay, I want to follow up on that because I've heard this before and I could also very much relate it to, again, like perfectionist, type A, even just me as a soccer player at Stanford, as a student athlete, it's your identity, right? And if you don't succeed, then you as a person are also failing. And it's very hard to separate the two. And I could very clearly see the same thing with starting your own company. So like you said, do you actively separate the two? Is it something that you have to remind yourself to say, okay, even though this didn't work out, I, Maria, am still, a badass, making this work? Or how does that play out for you?
Yeah, I look, like being a startup in mental health is almost like an oxymoron in a way.
Yeah.
Because like it's not that like you can't find balance and you can't like, there's not a lot, you can't like to get this to be what we want it to be. Like you need to work hard and we need to like do the impossible, right? Like the reason why there's a mental health crisis is because we haven't found a solution, right? So we're doing something that no one's ever done before. And to do that, we need to do things that no one's ever done before, right? So that is, I think, a really interesting sort of balance to hold and to think about, especially like for myself and for the team. So, when we think about like, it's a marathon, not a sprint. And how can I find ways to like fill my cup and sort of spend time doing other things that will help me sort of get perspective and find, other points of views. I think like that's important. But I think like one of the most powerful things my coaches taught me is like, we all have triggers and we all have tendencies, and how do you make them work for you instead of against you? So it is totally part of my identity, and that drives me. And I think that can be a superpower.
I like that.
And it's important to then recognize like when it's not a superpower, when it's your kryptonite, how do you reframe, right? And what are and I think we're lucky in that because we come with very like D-school design thinking type of world where we're very much like fail fast, fail often. We're feedback forward, right? Like we give each other feedback constantly and are always trying to get better. So I think that's part of the culture too, which is in some ways, also an oxymoron because it's like very high quality, but like always get feedback on everything. And like your first draft is always bad. So, so it's also an interesting tension to hold, but I think that has become a lot. It's almost like freeing in some way because you're like, hey, I'm going to do my best. And I know that it's always going to get better and that it can get better. And that's okay too. And both things can be true simultaneously.
Ooh, I love it. I love that. I really do. I love how it's almost just rewriting the narrative and almost like reframing it. I love that. And you also basically, alluded to my next question, which is, what do you think is your superpower?
Definitely that being able to sort of recognize that. And I think that's a big one.
Yeah.
One, I'm like a master detective, and that's always useful. But like, and like that comes into play in so many ways, right? When you think about like trying to investigate and understand user behavior, trying to manage your team and it's like, hey, is something wrong? Like you said this word differently. And like, that's a thing. Like I read into things a lot.
So is that being a great detective or just having incredible high EQ and empathy? And maybe that's how I interpret it, but maybe it is a detective's spider senses. I
mean, if it were another life and like, I think about like, what's my parallel life? Like, I think I would be in the CIA. So maybe it's a little bit of both.
I love that. I love that. Okay. To continue the fun questions, how do you define success and how has it changed over the last 5 or so years?
Yeah, that's a hard question because, again, I think we've always had, in so many parts of our life, we're like, this is an A. A is success. Yay. Continue.
Yeah.
And now, when you start something, there's very different ways to define success. Like for a little bit of time there in Silicon Valley, it was how much money did you raise and who's on that cap table?
Yeah.
And, someone asked me yesterday, actually, like, what's your ultimate goal with this company? For me, it's getting it into the hands of every student, every kid. And it's not about, like obviously we're highly ambitious, mission-driven people and want a wonderful outcome. But at the end of the day, what drives us and like what defines success is the lives that we change. And that is, that I wouldn't have said that 2 years ago, 5 years ago. It was making more money or getting a higher title. And, I think about what do I do after this? Because it's like you can't, the higher title or the more money like doesn't matter anymore. It completely shifts your perspective once you're in, at least for me, it shifted my perspective once I got into like these shoes.
Yeah, that's very impactful in a sense. And you can tell like the passion has kind of just taken over you. And you don't really have a choice to not follow that and to not let that kind of lead your life, which is beautiful. Okay, I want to go back to the high conviction, most contrarian opinion. And yeah.
Okay, we're getting real deep here. Guacamole is actually really bad. I hate guac.
Real deep.
Real deep.
Do you like avocados?
No.
Oh, okay.
No.
That
I don't
might
like
be it
any of that.
even.
Maybe that one's it.
Yeah.
Everyone always is very surprised and they're like, I don't understand, you're an alien. I'm like, maybe. It's possible.
I don't understand the people that say guacamole is basically the same thing as avocado, because that is very different. Because like there's spices and everything, but I mean, you wouldn't even know because you don't like any. So you're like, yeah.
Don't know, can't tell
you. All right,
you.
that's a good one. I like that. All right, Maria, it has been such a pleasure to have you on the show. I've absolutely loved it. And your story is incredible. And I have to say, from my, own perspective, I got to know you not too long ago, and it's been such a beautiful pleasure of mine. And hearing now about your story of, coming with your mom, single mom and everything, and giving back to your family and the pressure you had, I would say that you have far exceeded that pressure, and you have given back in so many ways, and you will continue to. So really, it's such a beautiful thing to see. So thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. It's been wonderful. And for the great questions.
Thank you so much for listening to the show this week. If you enjoyed, please spread the word. Tell someone about She Leads or post about it on social media and tag us. If you want to contact us, feel free to send over a message through the She Leads Instagram page at sheleads.show. If you want to follow us on Twitter, our account is @SheLeadsShow and mine is @CarlyMalatsky. This episode was produced and edited by Nick Furshow. Thank you also to our partner, Floodgate. If you're passionate about startups and want to learn more about the starting journey of those who have built groundbreaking companies, I highly recommend listening to Starting Greatness with Mike Maples Jr., the founding partner of Floodgate. He has an incredible show that, in my opinion, is definitely worth your time. Thanks again.